My mentor passed away last year, and I didn't understand at the time, but I understand it now. And he used to say to me, Andy, your skill set is your safety net. And at the time, I didn't appreciate it because I was too much in the trenches and the weeds of trying to do the work. But now I fully recognize that for the last 8 years of my life, I've been contracting, entrepreneuring, running businesses, consulting and coaching others. But all I've been doing is just leaning on my skill set. And I have been able to provide for my family, have a roof over my head, always have food, never worry economically, regardless of how the market conditions have been. And it's because I've actually tapped into exactly what he said, which is understanding deeply what my skill set is, and it's become my safety net.
I'm Hattie Willis, your host, and each episode I talk to an entrepreneur, investor, or startup expert to unpack their hardest moments, biggest wins, and hard-earned advice so we can shortcut our learnings as founders together. This episode, I'm joined by Andy Ayim MBE, a serial founder and angel investor who's known for his human-centered approach to business. Over a decade ago, Andy co-founded Mixtape Madness, a proudly bootstrapped 7-figure business. When he left day-to-day operations there, he dove into product management with high-growth startups, such as WorldFirst, which was acquired for $700 million by Ant Financial, and Series C startup Zilch, where he was head of product management. In 2018, he took his next leap to become managing director at US-based VC firm Backstage Capital, where he raised over $2.5 million to deploy into underrepresented founders. As you'll hear, improving equity in the startup ecosystem has been a huge driver for Andy and led to his next startup, the Angel Investing School, a company on a mission to train the next generation of angel investors, including those who feel excluded by the current system or who haven't typically seen themselves represented among angels. Additionally, Andy supports startups, scaleups, and corporates as an advisor. This is someone who knows what it takes to grow a company. Andy's impact has seen him get voted as one of the top 10 BAME leaders in tech in the Financial Times, as well as being awarded an MBE for his services to diversity in tech. Andy has also been one of our biggest supporters at If We Raise from the very early days, in fact, even before I met my co-founder Tim, and is now one of our board advisors, so it was extra special having him on the show. In this episode, we discuss Andy's personal user guide as his introduction into the world of entrepreneurship, and why we probably all need one. Why Andy created Angel Investing School and how it's evolving. The importance of building social capital and a personal brand as a founder. Why fundraising isn't always the best option. What Andy looks for in founders from an angel's perspective. The importance of storytelling and how to nail it. The backwards relationship we have with failure in the UK. And much, much more. We hope you enjoy, and please do let us know what you think when you've had a listen. Thank you for coming on the show, Andy.
Thank you for having me. I know it's taken ages, but
A few years.
I'm a fan. I'm a fan of the show, and I listen to episodes, obviously Tim and a lot of others, so happy to be here.
Oh, I'm so excited. And there's so much I want to dive into. I was actually rereading just before we came on your personal user guide, which you had sent me years ago.
Wow, you still had that?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Everything's in the email, man. You're never letting that go. And I thought actually it's a really nice place to start because you created this personal user guide, which you share with founders you're thinking of investing in, people you're thinking of working with. And you were sharing it with us actually as a suggestion that Tim and I should do it for If We Raise, which we haven't yet, but probably should still.
But I feel like you did an onboarding experience together where you actually really got to know each other.
True.
Before you worked well together, so... But
I kind of thought we could run through the basics of your personal user guide as your intro to your world of entrepreneurship, because you talk in that document actually about your exposure to entrepreneurship being quite different to the norm, or certainly different to what you've heard from other stories. So can we start there? What was your first exposure to entrepreneurship, and was it something you grew up thinking was for you? How did you get into that world?
So I think the personal user guide is a good place to start to unveil that story, because the personal user guide was my attempt of externalizing and writing down a guide on who I am and how I work and how I think and what I do when I'm stressed and how I communicate. And it just gives you a bit of a layer into who I am and who you're dealing with. And I found it a really disarming tool in a positive way, so that it equalizes a relationship So if I'm speaking to a founder, they're not going to feel like Andy's a superior investor and I'm a founder. Instead, hopefully they come into the conversation, feel like we're connecting adult to adult, human to human.
Yeah.
And I feel like when you connect at that authentic place with people, it's a lot easier to make meaningful connections, regardless if it's a founder or a partner or a client. And I find that they find it refreshing because it gives them permission to then open up.
100%.
So now we can ask each other about kids or holidays or more than just work. And it makes the level of work a lot deeper when you actually get into work. So it's a lot easier to collaborate now. And I find that to build trusted relationships and have hard conversations or overcome challenges, me as a person, I need to get to that level with people. So that's the reason why. And when I look at the root cause of where that came from and how that led to entrepreneurship, as a child, my dad was a minicab driver, my mum was a nursery nurse, and they were both in people relationship type businesses. You're proper smiling.
I didn't know your mum was it. My mum also taught at a nursery school.
Oh, there we go. Hence the smile.
Yeah.
You should have smiled at me.
I love it.
And the subjects that I studied in college were like humanitarian subjects, like the sociology, history, theology. So it was always around this relationship with humanity. I was deeply into philosophy and wildlife, but it was all about this relationship with people because I believe that we're all born to have shared experiences and not be lonely. And actually, when I go into investments, it's that same philosophy I use to invest in people. Because often these entrepreneurs haven't got 5 years of accounts that I can look up or performance records or thousands of customers. They're often starting from scratch. So I'm really diving into these heuristics all around who they are, what they believe, the breadcrumbs in their story that makes sure that they're well suited to solve this problem that they're going after. So I find just as a skill and a way of living, it benefits me in all facets of life.
The stories you tell in it are personal stories. You read it and you do feel like you know you and you know the way you communicate and the way you talk, and it's something I would recommend actually any founder has a go at doing, as you said, whether for a co-founding team or to get to know investors, because what you're really communicating is your deep why.
Absolutely.
And why you fit that startup. So your parents are both in these roles where they do a lot, but not necessarily what we would class as entrepreneurial. So what was your first exposure to entrepreneurship?
So my first exposure, I don't think I've actually told this story on a podcast before.
Love a scoop.
I was at university. I went to Brunel University. I studied accounting and business management, did a placement year in industry as an accountant and decided very quickly that it's not for me. Love accountants, no issue with accounting, just not for me. And during my final year of university, I had this module around entrepreneurship. And I was a president of the Entrepreneur Society at the time. I didn't know what it really meant at the time looking back, but I was really enthusiastic about businesses, how they fit together and how it's a platform for doing so much good in the world. A lot of my investments follow that same thesis around actually like investing in the internet of the future. And while I was a part of that society and doing that module, I got into this opportunity of creating like an entrepreneurial project. I did it with 3 of my friends. We came together, created a company called Saffirm, which stood for Self-Affirm. Nice. And it did transferable skills workshops where we'd go into deprived communities and take like, this can sound kind of crazy, but the transferable skills of a drug dealer and compare it to a trader and show how you can take a lot less risk in being a trader and there's more possibility of you getting a better upside and you don't have to die or go to jail. So why would you be a drug dealer when you could be a trader? And then we go into like universities and church groups and government groups and teach young people about the transferable skills that they have to become entrepreneurs as well. And the irony looking back is that because of imposter syndrome, we said, oh, we need to go into our careers ourselves before we teach this stuff. And looking back, it was the wrong thing to do. And we used this formulas that we were teaching the young people. And I think one person ended up at like Morgan Stanley, the other person at Twitter, and myself at Ernst & Young. So what we were teaching, we kind of walked the walk and it worked, you know. And a lot of what we were teaching as well was around social capital and how social capital can be a bridge to opportunity. And my personal mission is all around actually how do you create pathways to opportunity for people from all backgrounds. So a lot of the work that I even do today is all around that central mission. So looking back, like I didn't have the courage back then to follow through on what was a good idea then and would still be a good idea now. And it's all about tapping into that latent potential that we have in humanity. And that's what I saw in that business.
But it's kind of amazing, and we'll come on to Angel Investing School, but the thread is so immediate of what you end up doing versus what you start doing.
Yeah, I'm laughing as you're saying it because I don't think I've ever even like went back to that project to realize that golden thread till today. And there's so much in between that is still along that same thread.
I mean, very clearly you are someone who works as your central mission to bring people into spaces that they're told that they don't belong in.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy that you captured that on the podcast because I could use that clip myself. But even what you just shared, Hattie, it's not even necessarily even a business. It's more just how I express myself. And a good example of that is, like, after I finished university, I got a job in EY, but it started a year in advance. So I started temping at these like different private equities, different companies, basically, just to save up money and go backpacking. And I remember I temped at one company and they wanted me to go permanent. I didn't want to be dishonest. So I ended up introducing a friend of mine that studied accounting at my university to replace me, and he stayed there for years. And that is an analogy of how I am. Like, I want to create space, and I don't want to leave that space vacant. I want to fill it in with someone else from our background who wouldn't have access to that opportunity but can do a great job. If I look at some of my jobs after, I've introduced these two women that I'm thinking of that I brought into this consultancy that I used to work in, called Elixir. And again, one went to my university, one I worked in a different job and brought her in. I'm always trying to create space, set a good bar in terms of standard so that I have trust. And then if I refer someone, it's based off my trust and my reputation. So before it was businesses, I was even doing it on that one-to-one level, which I think shows that it's meaningful for me, that social mobility and social capital and that link.
And I do think, I often say this to founders, particularly those at the beginning of their career, but it's relevant to everyone. I think the best thing you can do as a founder, given that we know that your business is probably going to fail, statistically, like maybe it won't, I really hope it won't, but statistically, it's probably going to fail. But if you act as this incredible connector in the spaces that you get to occupy because of this startup, because of this role you're playing,
absolutely,
that network that you build the trust around you build the social capital, but also to your point, like it's uplifting you in that process.
Absolutely.
You get to keep that.
Yeah.
You walk away with your network, whatever happens to the business. And I think founders forget to value that they're building that and forget to invest in the people around them sometimes because you're so focused on, and we've talked about it a lot with If We Raise, with Angel Investing School, there is still a temptation with people building communities for founders or communities to say, I'm going to guard this space, I'm going to guard this mission, you're stepping over my line. But we both have the approach of, let's all work together to solve this problem.
So I didn't know we were going to get here so soon, but actually it brings me onto a good point around the Angel Investing School journey, because the core mission at the start of that business was that I wanted to democratize access to angel investing, because founders and aspiring investors or people that didn't realize that they could do this thing called angel investor were coming to me and asking me about it, and I'd introduce them to angels in my network. You've met some of those angels, of course. And it was really manual and it wasn't an efficient use of time. So I thought, like any entrepreneur does, how can I make it more efficient? Let me do these cohort-based courses. I'll do it on the side outside of work. It turned into a business, which was the Angel Investing School. And this is probably announced here first, but this year we decided, instead of doing these private cohort-based courses that we were delivering to a Google or to a one-off session to a Stripe, actually, how do we democratize access? To democratize access, we have to make it simple, easy, and truly accessible. So we're launching a platform. It might be launched by the time this comes out, called Open Angel. And the whole premise there is so that if a founder is fundraising from angels, they know exactly what to do and what to try to have an efficient fundraise. If you're an aspiring angel and you've never started in this asset class, we hold your hand through these open source videos and content to get you started to a point where you can make your first investment. If you're a high net worth individual, we can handhold you and even add you into our syndicate to invest alongside us. So now we're creating pathways which are really accessible so that hopefully the whole internet will point to this resource and say, if you want to learn about angel investing as a founder or an aspiring angel, here's where you can start. And it's all free.
I love it. And it's great because actually, to your point, every time someone says to me as a founder, where do I start? I need to understand angels. I need to meet them. I always say, go to an angel investing school event. But as you say, that's not the way to reach as many people as possible.
Yeah, because it's still amazing. Private. It's still limited numbers. When we do our masterclasses together, I loved when I came and did the last session with If You Raise. But that session and the sessions that we do are so valuable. If 1,000 people come, it's the same value they're receiving, let alone just 12 or 10 or 5 people. So it's like I'm trying to build these ways that I can scale myself, but also alleviate pressure of myself so I don't have to keep doing the coffee catch-ups.
Yeah. And this is something I actually want to come back to, because I think often the challenge for the founder is working out when to change the model. But you have already had another startup. We kind of 1-2 skipped a few.
Yeah, we did.
Madness.
We did.
Too many startups, Andy.
We did.
So-
That was my first real business. And I think the link when I look at that, even what you said, Mixtape Madness and what I'm doing today with the Angel Investing School and whatnot, is they're all coming from personal pain points. These things personally matter to me. So because they personally matter, I'm more willing to be resilient, to have the grit, to see it out, to play the long game, because they matter to me. You know, so Mixtape Madness, the reason that business started, and it's hard for people to envision this, but it was pre-Spotify and pre-iTunes. There was an internet before these services existed, and Apple Music and iTunes and whatnot. And at that time, we loved UK urban music, rap music, grime music. I grew up on it. It helped nurture me like a third parent, if you like. So consuming that music online was a nightmare because there was these dodgy little grime forums, or you go to a MySpace that's not maintained, or a website managed by a label. They don't even know tech. So what you'd find is to find and listen to my favorite music, it was very inaccessible. Or I'd have to listen to pirate radio on dodgy frequencies. So we wanted to create a central location online where we could just consume that music. So we started off by creating a landing page with just an email address and images of all of these mixtapes in the background that you could access if you sign up. Then we go to these parties or raves at universities, sign people on an iPad, go to like local high streets, sign people on an iPad. And we got to, I think, about 300 people where we said, all right, because of this demand, we have to start building. So we all learned HTML and started building. And
sorry, I'm cutting you off because this is, I think founders are going to accidentally skip over this bit, but this is pretty crucial. You've built nothing. You've had this idea. You've not rushed to build it. You've just put up a really simple one-page website. Gone around and manually got people to sign up, which...
And this is like 2009, 2010.
Before Lean Startup came out.
Before the mum test came out. And so we didn't have access to all of this curriculum at the time. It was more leaning on the resourcefulness we've gained from growing up in environments like Tottenham and North London, where we've just grown up to be resourceful. It was just a way of life. So for us, it was very wasteful for us to go fully into development when we can't code. We have to learn to code, which is going to take time. We don't want to pay someone because we can't afford. So the quickest, cheapest, easiest thing for us to do was to try and test out whether people really want this. And that was our version of doing that. And obviously that mentality is still the same today when we're coaching founders. And I look back and I'm quite grateful actually that I learned those things at that time that now is obviously really like there's frameworks and books and courses and whatnot around it. But it's the right way to build and it's a resourceful way to think about actually like, let me separate myself from my idea and let me actually see if this is something people really want. And if they're willing to trust me with their contact details, whether it's their phone number or their email address, then I can take a step in that right direction. And there's a few more steps before you get paid, but you can just take steps in that right direction.
And I think all too often, I actually say this a lot, which is why I paused you there, because I think when you understand the principles of actually you can test demand before you build anything, when you go through curriculum, workshops, training to do that, it then feels really obvious. Like, why wouldn't you do that? But I think you are massively in the minority with it coming to you that is the right place to start without anyone telling you.
I felt like I couldn't afford not to. That's the difference.
Yeah.
If I had an abundance of capital, I would have made mistakes. But because I didn't, it forced me to be resourceful.
I want to pick up on that thread back to Angel Investing School. And I think we're jumping everywhere, but I think it's important to, because I think
I was going to go back there too.
I love it. So aligned. But I think founders have this misconception that if you just raise, it's all easier.
Yeah.
And to your point, I'm fully agreed with you. I actually think it's easier to make a ton of mistakes if you have money than it is without. So when you're seeing founders come into you to pitch to Angel Investing School, to the syndicate, or to you individually, I'm curious, like how much do you end up saying to them, go get some proof points and come back? What pushback do you find yourself giving? Because you're not the norm that goes and tests it before building it.
So when we built Mixtape Madness, we did have an opportunity where we got approached by a senior manager in PwC who wanted to be an angel investor and bring a tech team on board and take a percentage of the company. And one of my co-founders, still a good friend till today, was adamant that he didn't want to give away any equity. He was like, I want to guard this with my life. I don't want to give away anything. I don't want any partner that I don't know coming into the business. at the time I was like, what's going on? Why? Like, we got an opportunity to take some money off the table, take some wages. But he was absolutely right. What he saw that I couldn't fully appreciate at the time was the future value of the business that we were building, and he was willing to protect that. What I don't see enough in founders that come to me these days is they value the future of what they're building, so they're giving away equity cheaply. It's a bad sign to me. It means you don't truly believe in what you're doing because you don't want ownership over what you're doing here. Because if you give away all of this equity, you're going to be down to a point where you're not even incentivized to build your business, or you exit and you don't receive the income that you thought you would from such an event. So really being protective of your equity is a good sign of showing that I value what I'm building and I believe in the future value of what I'm building. So when founders are coming to me and they're so quick to raise, sometimes without a pitch deck and I try to get to the core root cause of what influenced their mentality. Was it a tech crunch, constantly getting fed that article about raises? Was it that they heard that this founder raised without a pitch deck, but they didn't have that context of the fact that it was second-time founder and they had a unicorn before, or they had these relationships with these investors from working at Goldman Sachs? I always try and get to the root cause of where it comes from. And I always ask this question around, if you can't raise, and for the next 12 months, you've got to build this business, what would you do? Would you build? And I rarely hear like, I'll figure out a way to build it without code, or I'll build it without the need of a developer, or the core thing. Because a lot of these founders, sadly, are raising to bring in a developer in-house. Or they're making costly mistakes and outsourcing tech, then actually raising even too little to even sustain. Like they don't really fully understand the game that they're going into, which is why I think If We Raise is such an important service, because it closes an education gap that's actually quite vast in society, which means that these founders are going into this journey thinking one thing, going through these painful lessons. It's almost like going through an assault course with stinging nettles, and then getting to the other end, feeling really worn and beaten up. But because they've made this external declaration that I'm a founder and I've started this business and this business does X, it becomes really hard for them to move on and get that closure. And there's a lot to unpack there, whether it's ego, whether it's society. But, my approach has always been very pure around I'm mission-led and I want to achieve these missions. I left Mixtape Madness when I felt like we achieved this mission at scale, and I was no longer well suited for the ride because my eyes were looking at different new golden shiny things, like the shiny magpie syndrome. I was on to the next thing. Or with Angel Investing School and open sourcing this platform, it achieves that mission of democratizing access to angel investing. So I'm really not married with an exit or a windfall event.
Yeah.
I'm much more committed to playing the long game and achieving missions.
And as you say, it's because it comes from that personal.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And I do think, and I don't often disagree with you, Andy, and I don't think at our call we disagree, but I do think the only thing that I get nervous about is that I think a lot of times we're not too harsh to founders. I think sometimes people need to be more honest. But I do think we've got to a space where it is so ingrained that you have an idea, you raise.
Yeah.
And I have a lot of patience for the founders who listen, to your point, who when you challenge them will go and think about how else they could do it. But I have so much patience for people who think that raising is the right option because that's what and to your point, you're getting fed it on TechCrunch, on Sifted, on every single thing you ingest. And also, particularly if you don't have access to capital, you don't have big personal savings, I think it's even easier to fall into those.
Yeah.
Well, how else am I going to do it?
It's
exactly.
a privilege, yeah. And I'm talking from a privileged position. My experience, I'm now middle class and not working class. I've got certain capital. It is a point of privilege to even advise a founder, save up work, save up money, build your runway, then build your startup is a privilege. Yes, to some degree, certain entrepreneurial pursuits are a privilege. And you have to understand that founder product fit. Am I in a space right now to solve that problem? Maybe I'm not. Cool. And I think that's a big conversation that people have to have with themselves. It's not an easy one because statistically, I'm so intrigued by the fact that VCs invest in less than 1% of new businesses that are created every year. Not only that, but only 1p in every pound goes to all women, which says to me as a signal, I don't want you. I don't want to invest in you. And then 0.02% goes to black women. That also to me as a signal says I don't want to invest in you. So I'm so intrigued at why so many still go down that route of I want to raise from a VC when statistically, I don't know which one of you are going to get an investment, but statistically today is less than 3%, it's less than 1% here.
And this is a much bigger debate that I genuinely think needs to be had much more honestly.
Yeah.
I think we can say we're obviously both in agreement. Those stats are frankly fucked and something's got to shift, right? And we can want that shift. But I personally don't want to keep convincing women, particularly Black women, to waste their time and energy going cup in hand to someone who's not going to fund them.
I agree.
But then how do we change the system? And this is where I get caught out.
And where I've arrived at today is I think you need to have a time box experiment when you're fundraising. I'm going to fundraise for 6 months, 9 months, 15 months. When I get to that point, I'm going to have a healthy conversation around what's worked well, what hasn't worked so well, and whether I'm going to kill it or continue. We need spaces like that just so that you can have a healthy disconnect from this process to understand, is this a great use of my time still? So I'm not opposed from anyone fundraising. Anyone can fundraise. But I'm not comfortable when I'm hearing people fundraising for 2 years. The system is working too inefficiently in that case, and I would consider something else in that situation.
For me, where I always try and push founders is if you're doing something to increase your chance of fundraising that also gives you options. So if that fundraise doesn't work out. So for instance, I got, and this is probably my most contentious thing at the moment, is that I think it's actually a pretty good thing that there is a downturn in investment only because we're seeing it change what investors look for, and they want revenue and they even want a path to profitability.
Can I reply to that though?
Oh God.
Because I think what people don't realize in this messaging from investors is that in the short term, they want a path to profitability so that you can survive to the next funding round. In the long term, their business model is still the same. If I raise £100 million fund, I need an exit of 4 billion or more in order to return my fund, given that I only own 10 to 5% of your company. Therefore, in the long run, I still need that accelerated growth. In the short term, I need to be profitable because I needed to make the next funding round. The times have changed. Valuations have reset. I'm getting pressure from my investors because all of the valuations in my portfolio have just gone down. So they're asking me where's the returns going to come from. So I want people to really understand that this short-term messaging doesn't change the business model. They're all still governed by the power law, which dictates that 6% of their portfolio is going to generate 60% of the returns.
Yeah. And I think, and you've got to understand how the VC works.
Yes.
And nothing actually changes fundamentally. They're going to keep backing 6% of their portfolio.
But like you said, as a media outlet, if they're saying path to profitability, they want to see profitable startups, and we're getting more profitable businesses starting, it's great because now you have optionality.
That's it. And my hope, and what I've seen a lot with founders in the last 2 years, is that founders who would have raised had to get more traction to raise, then decided, hang on, why do I need you now? I don't. I can grow this business a different way. And that's what I like to see, is that those who shouldn't necessarily raise now can get there because they're not, to your point, wasting all their runway trying to raise.
And I think the other side of that same book is like a lot of these founders that have already gained investment, built these big teams because of the investment that they got on. They were growing at all costs, hadn't really monetized what they're doing, and now they're scrambling to figure out, can I get to that path to profitability given the burn rate that I have and the runway that I've got left? And that's where I'm seeing the most tension, especially with consumer startups, whereas they're not going to get the traction that they need in terms of monetization and income or monthly recurring revenue in order to unlock that next round. What do you do? And I feel like that's where the most challenging conversations that I've seen, even within my own portfolio today, to be honest. And a lot of my investments actually with the syndicates that I work with have been on startups that actually want to prioritize profitable growth, that actually want majority ownership. And actually their angel round might be their final round, and they'll leverage debt and retain profits to grow. Because that way, as an angel, I'm not lying underneath all of these liquidation preferences, which means that these VCs all get paid before me. And same with the founder, because we're on the same class of shares. And as a founder, you get a life-changing outcome of 30 million to 300 million as an exit, and it's too small for VC, but is it too small for you?
100%.
You know, like the majority of founders that I speak to, if I talk to them about exits at that size, 90% of them would be actually happy with that.
And I think what founders forget, or maybe just don't understand in the first place, is that, to your point, because of a VC needing you to get to 4 billion, the amount they need you to grow year on year means you have to be spending a ridiculous amount on growth, which means if they don't invest in you in the next round, or another VC doesn't, you can't keep surviving, or it's really, really hard. And so many startups I see get VC and think, yay, we're now a success, and actually just die in the next round, because actually it's really hard to go back from there. And that's why we spend a lot of time trying to help founders work out whether to take VC at all, because it's a really hard treadmill to get off.
This is going to be a bit contentious for some people, but some founders don't really appreciate the corporate world as a training academy enough. If I work for a corporate in a specific industry, let's say that I worked in manufacturing for 10 years, I've got a depth of relationships now. Mm-hmm. I've got a depth of knowledge and expertise in that network. That's my edge if I want to start a business. And then I see a specific problem now that isn't being solved well, is really unholy workaround, is really inefficient, and I know that technology can solve that problem. Now when I pitch myself, it becomes almost obvious that why I'm well suited to solve this problem, and I've got the network there, and I've hired my friend, my ex-colleagues to come and join me on this journey, and you just heighten the probability of being investable. So working in a corporate isn't a negative thing. I want people to really understand how it's a training academy that actually sets you up. It sets you up for that next adventure, whether it's an entrepreneur or solving problems with a company. And I think more entrepreneurs need to consider that as a part of their journey, rather than see it as I'm my own boss or nothing.
Okay, so I think I want to dive deeper on Angel Investing School.
Sure.
Because I think we've just touched on a load of things that actually founders maybe don't think about before going after investment. I really like when founders consider angel investment as actually it could be the entire kind of pool of investment you take. You maybe don't need to go and do VC as well. What do you wish as an angel? What else do you wish founders did before they came to you, or understood before they came to you and asked you for money?
So first, let me start with what I wish from angels.
Okay.
Because I wish more angels were educated to the fundamental level, which is what we're trying to teach, so that there's not such a fragmented experience. Bad actors, people giving warrants and all these dodgy terms. I wish there was a more standardized experience for angels in our ecosystem, because it will level up the experience for founders.
Let's pause there, sorry, before you go on. You mentioned something, warrants, which I think a lot of founders don't quite know what that means or what they're giving away. Because a warrant for me is a slightly sneaky thing, because it feels like nothing today, because it is nothing today, but a warrant basically gives someone the right to buy shares in your company at today's valuation for a period of time. And can you just explain to founders listening who are thinking about maybe they have been asked for that from an angel and it seems like a good thing? I think it kind of feels like, oh, they want a right to buy into my company. That's a good signal. Why is that bad?
Yeah, it's not even just warrants, but let's start with warrants and I can move on to some other examples. But you're harming your future value of your business. You're harming your ability to fundraise from others who see that you've got that warrant, and they'll either say that I want that warrant too, or they'll say I'm not investing because I've been put off by that warrant. Because what you've done is you've built a company and you're building more value in that business, but you're giving that person access to that discounted value that they got yesterday. They shouldn't be able to get that privilege. Another one is anti-dilution rights. To say that in your next funding round, I'm going to maintain my 5% ownership regardless how much you raise. Again, other investors will either say that I want that too, or be put off by the opportunity and say, why are they getting anti-dilution rights? Everyone should be diluted equally as we go into future funding rounds. And if they have a pro rata, which is the ability to maintain my equity ownership in the next funding round, then they should put the money up to do that. Because it's a now more valuable company. So you have to put more money up to maintain that position. And it should be equal ground for everyone to make it more attractive for other investors to come into your round.
And it comes back to your point earlier of what we definitely see happen a lot, which is founders undervaluing their companies when it comes to equity. So being willing to give away equity too cheap today, or
not even understanding the terms, because I'm not bouncing off a lawyer or someone. I haven't got someone in my network that I can bounce it off.
100%. And I often think it's not that for me, it's not a signal that you're undervaluing the company. It's just a signal that actually people who know better are slightly trading off the fact that you're doing this for the first time. So founders, what do you wish they did before they came and sought investment from you?
The first thing is know their why. Be really strong and have conviction over why you're well suited to solve this problem. My edge, my unique story, my origin story, because that first round of fundraising is really about storytelling. And for that person to connect with you, believe in you, and believe in the future of what you're trying to build. So it's a really big story that you're trying to tell to get that person on side. So it starts with you and it ends with you.
Yeah.
So you really need to have conviction and practice what that story is and how you pitch and position that story. The second thing that which they did is spend more time with customers. I love it when founders are telling me customer stories. Yeah. They're so embedded in their customers. They're telling me what Susie did in the context of which she did it. Like when someone has that problem with their products, they're telling me about the other competitor products and why it doesn't work and how they've won people over from those competitors. It's so convincing when they're sharing that with me. I leave that meeting curious, excited, and eager to know more.
I once was talking to a startup and they were doing bike insurance and they were able to tell me that they know exactly who their customer is because their customers, after every single bike ride, wash their bikes down. And they told me that one thing and I thought, you know exactly who you're working with, you know why. And to your point,
that.
And I was immediately like, wow, they get it.
Yeah. I was listening to actually another interview about a psychotherapist that worked at NASA. And he was looking at what is the emotional intelligence traits that makes for a good astronaut. But he found that whenever he would look at the final interviews of these astronauts, they're also polished. That, you ask what's your biggest weakness, or they're going to give you the polished answer. So instead, he ran all of the interviews from the best astronauts historically who have gone to space. And he tried to listen out to the keystrokes and what the differences are. And what he zoned in and noticed was there's a certain way that astronauts laugh.
No. What?
And it was the laughter that he correlated with great performance as an astronaut. And it's crazy to think about that. But when someone is a master of their craft, they can point at that little thing just like a founder can. I think it's incredible, whatever that thing is.
But actually, that is a nice segue that I think picks up some of the threads of we've talked about founders needing to tell their story. And the first point you made, you used the word story, I think about 5 times. I don't think founders are good enough at the storytelling. You then mentioned telling customer stories as well as your own.
Stories again. And what you realize is that at the core of this business, I needed to learn the core story and learn how to leverage that in different ways when telling that story to different audiences. One is to customers, one is to attract new employees to join me on this mission, one is to investors to tell a certain story, one is to suppliers and partners to tell another story. So it's the same core story, but I have to learn the different ways in which I tell it depending on which audience I'm telling it to.
Exactly. Which brings me to your personal brand quite neatly, because you are kind of a big deal on LinkedIn and other areas.
I don't know what that means, but I'll accept it. Thank you.
You're a big deal, Andy. Really, you're like a celebrity.
Yep. All right. I'll take it. I'll take it.
So one thing I often talk to founders about at the moment, and really curious on your take on it, is that I think founders need to do more to build personal brand before they raise investment. But to your point, they should be doing it so that it's not just a brand that resonates with investors. It should also resonate with customers, kind of crucially.
Such a timely question. But yeah.
But should also resonate with prospective employees and everything in between, partners, everyone you listed. I think personal brand is really key in this. Having built a personal brand, I'm curious how deliberate that was for you. And if it was deliberate, what were the outcomes you were looking for and has it delivered? And if not, what has surprised you about it? And what would you now say, knowing what you know, having built a personal brand, to someone thinking about it?
The reason that this is so timely is literally before I made my way here today, I had an entrepreneur consultant who wanted to run a post past me that they want to put onto LinkedIn. And the post said something like, and I'm going to anonymize it, but it said something along the lines of, in the last 12 months, I've left my corporate job, set out on my own as this beauty consultant, and I've made, let's say, 150K in revenue. Here's a screenshot from my Xero account. And he was testing it off me to say like, Andy, it doesn't feel right, but this is what I want to post because I want to do a free session or event to teach people my lessons learned and how I got here after leaving my corporate job. And I said, look, I think the core of why you're doing what you're doing is pure, and I know you. So I don't think this post in this style represents you, But I do think that if you want to try and connect authentically with your audience, you should just be honest and be how you are and say that, look, I want to hold this free session because I left my job 12 months ago. I've managed to generate 6 figures. You don't need to say what the number is. And I just want to give back in a meaningful way to help people who are trying to transition too. People are going to connect with that more. It might be 12 instead of 200 likes.
Yeah.
But those 12 people are your true audience. They're your true fans. They're exactly who you're trying to attract. Rather than that 200 people who you're trying to attack. There's 200 people who are just loving the content because it feels like a social media post. You don't want that. And if I look at the core of what I've tried to do on LinkedIn over the last 5 years is I've always focused on just being useful and helpful. So my posts are not there to get 100,000 views. They're there to tell stories that can help someone make a more informed decision in this space of entrepreneurship and investing. It's only recently where I feel like I'm getting bored and I've done this so much that I'm just going to package a lot of those best lessons in Open Angel now. And I'm going to speak about some different things like social mobility and social capital and relationships and connecting authentically. And I'm going to show a different side of myself. But again, it's still going to be rooted in being useful. That's just my style. That's who I am.
And I think...
So when someone meets me in person...
Yeah, it's the same.
It's the same. And they appreciate that. And when we host an event, you've been in the events, people feel at home. Sometimes they've got their shoes off and their socks are on the sofas and that. They feel at home. And when they're speaking to the audience after, they can speak to any of the panelists. We're all on the same level. It's very human.
Yeah.
And they appreciate that space. So that offline and online connection, I think people really appreciate that. Who I am online isn't very different to meeting me in person. I'm stuck up and I'm unapproachable. And I think that authenticity is probably one of my superpowers, even though in my head I normalize it and feel like everyone should be authentic. And I think that's how superpowers usually are. You don't see it in yourself, even though it's a big deal.
And I think the word authenticity is almost banded around too much without it being authentic, which is kind of ironic. But actually, I often say this to people. We have founders in the community saying, I feel like I should be doing personal branding, but I don't want to do a LinkedIn selfie. I don't want it to be this. I keep saying it doesn't have to be. I've done LinkedIn selfies. They perform well. They're not my favorite post to write. They're not the posts, to your point, that deliver the value. And I think one of your superpowers, I would say, is you are, I think, the best person I've ever seen for helping translate. So
I love that.
When I watch you, and I think this is what's special about Angel Investing School, when I watch you host panels, I'm sat there going, this is what I want to learn from, because I genuinely think you're listening for what might someone be left out by. What might someone feel left behind, where they're feeling they should be nodding and they should be getting it.
Yeah.
And I think if more people did that in their space,
absolutely,
listen for other people who feel left behind, listen for the people who don't know the acronym but could have a great take on it if it was just explained to them clearly.
Absolutely.
And my wonderful boyfriend was brilliant when we first met at taking the mick out of me so much for how many startup words I used. And he was like, what the hell is the BMC and why do you reference it 50 times a day? Business model canvas. Yeah. And I was like, oh God. But actually, I do think this is where I'd like to see more personal branding going.
Yeah.
Because I think we get caught up in thinking the person who knows their space best is the person who talks in its language. I love that. Full credit to Sam, because this is not a me takeaway. This is me being given this by him. But actually, the people who know their stuff are the people who can say it in the easiest way.
Yeah. And you know what I love that? It's like one of my good friends set up an agency called Translate Culture. And I love that name because I think it represents so much of my journey. Like when I first got into the professional world, I remember feeling physically like two worlds colliding. But I could really translate my skills of my lived experience into how to perform as a management consultant. And it gave me the insight that there's others that I know, if I can help them translate, they could be doing this job too. If the Angel Investing School is the same philosophy around this stuff sounds complex and scary and opaque on the surface, let me make it easy and simple for you to understand, because we need to make sure that you're all financially literate and can make more informed decisions now that you understand it. And when I look at a lot of the work that I do with leadership teams today, a lot of it is around really understanding where they are, what a trust issue is that's been really challenged, and actually translating where they are in a more human way so they can connect again with their team members. And that's at the basis of that high performing team. So I love that you use the word translating because as I think through it, there's so many, again, that golden thread experiences where I'm coming in as a translator, essentially, whether it's strategy or executing on this or building a fund, or a lot of it's to do with translating it and making it meaningful to that audience or that team.
So I want to pick up on that piece because we've talked a lot about fundraising, which is where we spend a lot of our time, but you do a lot of consulting with startups as well. And also as an angel, you're someone who gets involved with the companies you work with. Not every angel does, always worth checking if they do or don't. What are some of the things that you've given most commonly as advice to startups that you don't think they get elsewhere? The things that you think are the Andy Ayim nuggets that they should be being told but aren't?
I think probably one of the number one things is confidence and self-esteem. It's really powerful to tell someone that you believe in them, look them in the eye, you genuinely mean it, and to see what they become, especially with the lessons that they learn, the relationships they start to build. I believe deeply in yourself and Tim and what you're doing at the beginning of your few raise, and to see it manifesting and the consistent iterations. Selfishly, I love it. Like, I love the game. You know, I love to see it. And I feel it's the same with the founders, because ideas are overrated and execution is undervalued. But execution is the art. That's where we want to really get to, a place where we can act on our ideals, put it out to the world, build a loyal audience, and sustain ourselves in the business through doing that. So to see founders go on that journey and to coach or support them on going on that journey just fills me with so much pride, to be honest.
What advice would you give to angels who are thinking, and I guess it goes both ways, because it's something we've spoken a lot with another angel friend, Marcus, about, where founders don't come to angels when they're struggling, and they need to, because that's where the support comes.
Here's where I'm a little bit different from a lot of angels, okay? When they share their pitch deck with me and I'm interested in potentially investing, I share my personal user guide back. Because of that, me and doing that act, it just levels out the relationship. It's like, he's human, he's broken, he's fragile, he's just like me. And because I set that relationship, I'm introducing myself in my broken whole self. So guess what times that you feel like you can turn to me? When you can relate to that story or that thing that you're going through that relates to what I put in my personal user guide. When the metrics are looking south, when I don't know how to communicate with these other investors, when remote working isn't working and I need help, when I need to downsize, that's when I'm best. That's when I'm best, human to human. This is not just about the business. How are you doing? How are you feeling? How can I help you with that? I'm going to make an introduction here. Let's have a workshop. I'll facilitate the workshop. You know, I'm not going to charge my founders, am I? But I'll facilitate that workshop, and they appreciate it so much. And I appreciate it too, because that's when I can be useful. When things are going really well, actually, I don't hear from them too much, and that's okay. I've got limited bandwidth too. I just enjoy the investor update emails. But actually, when things are not going so well, there's a founder actually that I spoke to this week, and I found the person fascinating, but I didn't agree with certain business decisions they'd made or how much they were raising. But I took a liking to the individual, and I said to them very honestly, I can't invest in this round financially, but I want to meet up with you like 2 or 3 times this year. And I want to meet up about these 2 or 3 points. I think one was around go-to-market and business model. One was around exit planning and what an exit looks like and what an acquirer would want in this type of business. Because I actually know the management consulting kind of field that they're in. And the third was around insourcing tech. Stop outsourcing. I'll help you insource. I've got people that can help you hire and find great talent to have in your team. And you need to think about your first team. So I help you think through what that first core team is. But I gave that offer to that founder to I actually want to give you time because I see something in you, and I believe in that thing that I see, and I want to spend more time together, and I want to be helpful.
And I think,
and I actually believe, that my help, if that person is open to it, the income and the revenue that they'll generate will far surpass what I would have made as an investment. So sometimes accessing the right person is the unlock you needed to achieve the revenue to say, I don't need to give away equity for the round. And that revenue is what you want to build your business off more than that equity. So even that mentality is a really smart and mature one for founders to understand as well.
And I think, again, one of the things that we get too caught up in attaching to investment is the advice. And you can get advice, and you can even down the line incentivize investors with equity less than you'd give away if they were.
That's got a bad stick in the market, by the way. But I don't think it necessarily should. There was a friend of mine we co-founded a business previously together. He was starting his business now. I helped him with business development and getting started with the business, his first few clients, and he rewarded me a little bit of equity after 2 years as a thank you for helping with those efforts. I don't think that's a bad thing. I think we have a story in our head that I gave away equity to this founder, this advisor. They were really poor. They didn't deliver on their promise, and I shouldn't have given them equity, and I gave them too much. Yes, that's a really bad scenario, but that isn't representative for the whole market. And I think it's really important for founders to make informed decisions
100%.
that are right for them. I would rather give away, let's say, a 0.25% of equity to an advisor, but that advisor helps me do business development, which helps me sustain the business financially, which means I didn't have to give away any further equity, than to raise 200K and give away 20% of my company.
And to your point, you can attach it to, have they actually delivered? You can make sure that it's aligned to the value you need from them.
You can put whatever you want in that contract. You can even make vested equity to say, you know, we're going to do 12 months with a cliff. In that 12 months, if we don't mutually see it beneficial, you don't get any equity. You know, after each year, you're going to get rewarded with more and more equity, so that incentivizes a long-term partnership. So there's ways to structure these things to protect you from the downside or the risk of non-performance or no-show or ghosting you.
And coming back to your point, which puts a lot of investors off, it becomes really transactional.
Yeah,
I need your money. And I get why founders get there, because it's hard to raise and you're stressed. And particularly if you're from a background where you're less likely to be invested in, you're having to push so much uphill to get there.
Yeah, it's hard.
But don't write this off as a path as well.
And there was a really popular blog post that I used to read every year by Kevin Kelly. He was the former editor-in-chief of Wired magazine. And it was 1,000 True Fans. And it's just like, focus on your 1,000 true fans. And if your 1,000 true fans paid you $100 each a year, you're making like a 6-figure salary. So just focus on your 1,000 true fans. And I think as a philosophy and a way of thinking is really healthy, actually, because it gets you really being useful and focusing on just the individuals rather than always thinking mass market and getting lost because of that. It's like saying that who's my customer? It's everyone. And it's no one.
Which I wonder, it may not lead us on, but I wonder if to a degree leads us on to a kind of closing thought from you on when is it time to move on? Because I almost wonder if you've got to your 100,000 pounds for angel, or your 1,000 pounds for angel investing school, and actually you're changing the model now. As you said at the beginning, you shut down that first business for the wrong reasons. Just to be clear, you're not shutting down angel investing school. It's just changing form.
Yes.
But in part to allow you to play with some other elements of your why. Yeah. How do you think founders should be thinking about when is the time to move on? And I guess there are different scenarios here, because there's you need to move on because the business isn't working, but there's also the needing to move on because it is. Yeah.
And perhaps an exercise for some founders is almost to write a letter to your future self when you start your business and really focus it in on why you're starting the business, the mission that you're trying to solve, how you're going to feel if you achieve that mission. At what point is there a healthy boundary if it's not working that I'm willing to walk away? Put it in an envelope, put it somewhere safe. And when it gets to that challenging time or that point where you have an offer on the table, bring back that envelope out, read it. There'll be something in it. I said I'll be willing to walk away if someone was willing to acquire the business for at least 15 million. And it will remind you of, I did say that, and it will help you make a more informed decision based on what you said at the beginning, because you're going to be in a different space and place in life. And maybe not everything's going to ring true, but it's going to help you in a healthy way to think through that decision.
And I think you do have to have a way of saying when to call it quits as well.
Yeah.
And I think it's really hard, because I think so much of what we ingest, and to a degree it's so true, you only succeed by persevering against all odds through a lot of hard moments as a founder. If you give up at the first sign of distress, you're not going to make it.
Yeah,
but equally...
I just feel like you don't have to go through hell to get to heaven. I don't think you do. And I think in today's society, in British culture, there's a really unhealthy relationship with failure. When I used to live in San Fran in 2015, failure was a badge of honor and it was a part of everyone's journey to success. Here is a hidden badge of shame. We don't celebrate it. We don't have failure parties. We don't talk about lessons learned from failure and see it as something to even put on the CV to say, wow, look at what they've been through to get to where they are today. We discount adversity. We discount your distance traveled. And it's a cultural problem in our entrepreneurship culture in the UK. I think that's not helping founders feel safe around failing and walking away and going on to your next thing. And I think from a personal identity point of view, angel investing is one expression of me. And I'm very aware of that. So to be full expression of myself, I have to show off more of who I am so you can connect with more of who I am. And I think founders should see it in the same way, that a business is an expression of them, but it's not all of who they are. There's beauty in understanding that as a founder so that you have that separation around this being just one facet, not all of me. So yeah, I think just understanding that you can be a full expression of yourself and what does that actually mean is a really healthy way to check in and understand if you're still on track for what you want to achieve, if you want to change courses. Because like you said at the beginning of this conversation, to take stock of what you've achieved so far, say that you're going to close it down or stop or pivot or move to something new, you still have the lessons, the relationships, the experiences. You take all of that into the next thing. So all of that is still beneficial. It's not a sunk cost. And I think sometimes we don't see the opportunity cost instead of actually how can I combine all of these 2 or 3 experiences that I had to move me into my next chapter.
And I do think you're right. We
start thinking that we're writing a book when we're actually just writing a chapter or 2. Boom.
That's amazing. So final 2 questions. First question, what is the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
My mentor passed away last year and I didn't understand it at the time, but I understand it now. And he used to say to me, Andy, your skill set is your safety net. And at the time, I didn't appreciate it because I was too much in the trenches and the weeds of trying to do the work. But now I fully recognize that for the last 8 years of my life, I've been contracting, entrepreneuring, running businesses, consulting and coaching others. But all I've been doing is just leaning on my skill set. And I have been able to provide for my family, have a roof over my head, always have food, never worry economically, regardless of how the market conditions have been. And it's because I've actually tapped into exactly what he said, which is understanding deeply what my skill set is, and it's become my safety net.
That's beautiful and not talked about enough.
Oh, thank you. I didn't have that financial safety net growing up, so I had to lean on something.
But and to your point, it comes back to actually like if we're wrapping our identity into a position as opposed to the things that we're actually building with that position, failure becomes so scary.
Absolutely. Whereas I can see a direct correlation with my main moments of failure and pain and overcoming those and who I've become because of that. And in fact, I'm still becoming. So like who I'm becoming despite all of those things happening. Sometimes on podcasts I've spoken about my father passing away and all of the experiences which are tragic, but even in those darkest times I can take lessons that have led me to who I am today, which is maybe a mature or individual point of view that's different about me. But I think when a seed is buried, you can either decide to be buried in darkness and feel like that's it, or understand if you want to shoot from that darkness and shoot your roots and kind of reach for the sky. And that's always my outlook on life.
And I do think for any founder who listens and that feels really far from where you are, I do think just pause with that. When I lost my mum, I was not the like, yay, I'm learning and growing from this. Not that I'm thinking you're yay.
Definitely not in the moment. Definitely not.
But you do look back and you can see where you were stronger even if you didn't want to be. Absolutely. And I think for founders listening who can't see that, to your point, it doesn't come at the moment. It comes from looking back on those really hard moments.
Yeah, that's why I'm such a big fan of keeping a journal. Because when I look back, it helps me to connect the dots. And it's a lot easier to look back and connect the dots than to rely on your memory to remember all of these things that you've been through and the correlation and what happened. And it led me to my wife after my father passed away. Like there's so many things that I can see a direct correlation with when I look back to and connect to the dots in my journal and what I was going through and what I was feeling and where it led me to. And there's so many opportunities I can think about like that. Like when I was an entrepreneur first, I was trying to start a business, trying to find a co-founder. It doesn't work for me because I want to have deep relationships with people. So the 3 months, like artificial experience doesn't work for artificial Andy. And I end up inviting Arlen Hamilton from the US to the UK to introduce her to the ecosystem. And one of those things was a private talk at EF, actually, with my good friend Rowan, who was interviewing her. And off the back of one of the meetings, she offered me the job as managing director of Backstage Capital. I didn't architect that. It wasn't on my roadmap. It wasn't a strategy. But I can see the direct correlation with leaning into my curiosity. It was actually an interview. I interviewed her for the podcast that I mentioned to you that I never brought out, right? That podcast never came out. On the surface, that podcast was a failure. I didn't release a single episode. But actually, the lesson from that failure is it led me to work at Backstage and build this brand around investing into underrepresented founders. And it's been a beautiful story connected from that point. But the serendipity from just feeding my curiosity and leaning into that experience led me to that opportunity. And again, that's a great example of your skill set is your safety net. Until that point, I'd never worked in an accelerator program, never built an accelerator program. It was the first time that I was building that ever in my life. But great talent can do great things when doing it for the first time. That's a whole nother conversation about hiring people and whatnot. But yeah.
What I'm hearing, Andy, is that you're offering to come back on the podcast another time. That's what
if they want me, if people let you know that this is a good episode and they got value from it, and maybe I can join one of our good friends like Tim. That'd be a lot of fun.
Okay, so you've heard it. If I hear it from enough of you, we want Andy back. We'll go into all of it. There's so much still to unpack. Okay.
Absolutely.
Final question for this one though. What is your proudest moment?
It's probably getting married, you know. There's so many things in that moment of getting married. Like the lady that I married, I've known since I was 16. Even though my father couldn't be there, my mum was there. My daughter was there. My son wasn't born yet. There's so many things in that moment that just are coming together of beautiful threads into a nice little bow. So that getting married was a big deal for me, actually. It's a really meaningful thing for me. And the person who is my life partner has just been invaluable and just changed my life. You know, I can hand on heart say that in many different ways. So I really value her and I value that moment and I value my family, and she's at the core of that.
And I think that's so fitting because one of the things in your personal user guide is, you know, your priorities. Business is not the top, right?
Yeah. You know what? I don't know if this reference is in there, and this is where I thought you were going, but I always reference that for a lot of people, work is the sun of their universe, and that in the evenings and the weekends, they're not going to the cinema trips or seeing their friends because they've got more work to do, or they're flying out to this country because work requires them to. And for me, when I had my daughter, it shifted and my family became the center of my universe. And now I was revolving everything around them. I'll only speak at maybe 1 or 2 events a week maximum, or I'll say no to opportunities if it eroded time with the family too much. Until today, that's just one of our values. We call it 2 and 5, but it's like 2 days a week. I can go and do whatever, do this. But for the five days remaining is with the family.
I love that. And I think important to remember is startups do feel just so all-encompassing for your identity. We've touched on for everything. Starting to kind of find that balance.
Yeah, I think on my deathbed, look, I'm not going to ask for any of my portfolio companies or my investments or my smartphone or my laptop. I'll ask for more time with my loved ones. So why wait till then when I can optimize for that now?
A beautiful note to end on. Andy, thank you for coming on the show.
More poetry next time. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. Before you go, please do take a minute to follow so you never miss another episode. We have some incredible founders coming up. And I always love to hear what resonates with listeners. So do drop us a direct message on Instagram @NotMyFirstGuest with any moments that meant something to you, ideas for future episodes, or your own entrepreneurial stories you want to share. Until next time, happy startupping.